Hello. Today we will delve into a thrilling and mysterious case from Brazil, a country that is both beautiful and perilous. This is a case where the murderer claims to have killed over 100 people, but is celebrated by many as a hero, a symbol of justice. It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? So what is the truth behind this story? Let's rewind time back to Brazil in 1954 to explore the infamous serial killer, Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Pedro confessed to murdering more than 100 individuals without feeling any remorse. He stabbed his father 22 times, removed his heart, and devoured it. If he went just one day without killing someone, he found it impossible to sleep. This chilling confession comes from Brazil's most notorious serial killer. Since the age of 13, he claimed to have taken at least 100 lives and was sentenced to 400 years in prison. However, incredibly, he was released after only 34 years and garnered support from numerous citizens who hailed him as a folk hero and a champion of justice. We begin our journey in Brazil, a vast nation in South America that shares borders with 10 other countries. Brazil occupies nearly half of South America's land area, ranking 5th in the world and being the 7th most populous country globally. It is renowned for the Amazon rainforest, but it also has a notably high crime rate. In 2023, Brazil accounted for 15 out of the 50 most dangerous cities in the world. Today's story revolves around Pedro Rodrigues Filho, who was born on October 29, 1954, into a typical farming family in Santa Rita do Sapai, southern Brazil. Pedro's parents worked various jobs to make ends meet, with his mother occasionally taking on cleaning work to supplement their income. From the moment he was born, Pedro's life was destined to be extraordinary. Why is that the case? We have often seen in movie scenes where the main character is born with a clenched fist, as if holding on to fate. Pedro was born with a damaged skull, primarily due to his violent father, especially when under the influence of alcohol. During his mother's pregnancy, he frequently kicked her in the stomach, resulting in Pedro suffering from a brain injury at birth. The obstetrician stated that given such strong kicks, it would have been unlikely for the fetus to survive, yet Pedro did survive and entered this world, which truly is a miracle. It could be said that Pedro had a resilient fate. Later on, his parents had 6 more children, creating a large family. Although they were not starving, their difficult living conditions made it impossible for Pedro to continue his education. From a young age, Pedro lived in an environment lacking strict supervision, and children raised in such settings often tend to go astray. As he grew older, Pedro began working alongside his grandfather, who, despite not being a good person, cared deeply for him. His grandfather taught Pedro various skills, from farming and hunting to butchering livestock. As a child, Pedro showed no fear of bloody scenes, which may have contributed to his later criminal behavior. On a day in 1967, at the age of 13, Pedro had a minor conflict with a cousin. After being hit, his anger surged, and for the first time, Pedro contemplated murder. He seized the opportunity when his cousin was distracted and pushed him into a sugarcane crusher. The cousin's arm was immediately caught in the machine, and Pedro, like a wild beast, only wanted to kill him. Fortunately, the cousin's cries for help attracted the attention of others on the farm, which saved his life. Pedro was quickly taken to the police station, but his grandfather believed the incident was not serious. Thanks to his grandfather's intervention, Pedro was only detained for 4 hours before being released back home. Despite the severity of the incident, the punishment he received was merely cleaning the sugarcane crusher. Following this event, Pedro moved to Sao Paulo with his family because his father found a night security job at a high school. However, shortly after, Pedro's father was fired due to accusations of stealing food from the cafeteria. This cut off the family's only source of income, plunging the large family into hardship. To alleviate the burden, Pedro frequently went into the woods to hunt and sell animals for extra money. During this time, Pedro's anger grew stronger. Although he recognized his father's violent tendencies, he knew that his father was serious and responsible at work. Pedro did not believe his father was guilty of theft. Instead, he thought that the person who put his family in this difficult situation was the vice mayor, who ordered his father's dismissal. Pedro resolved to take revenge for his father. Pedro went to his grandfather's house to take a hunting rifle and set up an ambush in the woods near the vice mayor's home. 2 days later, Pedro finally got his chance. As soon as the vice mayor stepped out of his car, Pedro approached him and shot him dead before fleeing into the forest. Instead of hiding far away, Pedro prepared to carry out a second assassination, targeting the school guard whom he believed had falsely accused his father. After committing the crime, Pedro began a life on the run, fearing police pursuit. He joined a local gang involved in organized crime and made a living through drug trafficking. During this time, Pedro met Maria, a widow who was also a drug dealer. Initially, Maria found Pedro charming and was drawn to him. But over time, as they lived together, their feelings for each other deepened. Just when life seemed to brighten a bit, danger struck again. Some associates of Maria's deceased husband feared that Pedro knew too many of their secrets and plotted to kill him. 3 members of the gang arranged to meet Pedro at a cabin in the woods, intending to attack him while he was swimming. However, one of the wives of the 3 men warned Pedro that it was a trap. Upon learning the truth, Pedro fought back and killed all 3. Pedro and Maria enjoyed a period of peace until Maria became pregnant. While Pedro eagerly awaited the arrival of their child, Maria was brutally murdered by the leader of a rival gang. This left him heartbroken. In Pedro's mind, the only way to ease his pain was to eliminate his enemies. He devised a plan for a horrific revenge. Finally, Pedro had his chance when the leader of a rival gang attended a wedding. He gathered 4 accomplices, blended into the ceremony, and unexpectedly opened fire on the gang leader. The attack resulted in 7 deaths and 16 others suffering serious injuries. Although he avenged Maria and their unborn child, Pedro's anger remained unresolved. For a long time afterward, he continued to hunt down members of the rival gang and killed many drug dealers. At this point, he was still not yet 18, but already had blood on his hands. Taking lives had become a routine for him. Pedro's brutal actions made him a primary target for the police. They formed a special task force to track him down, forcing him to avoid public appearances. Eventually, on January 24, 1973, at the age of 19, Pedro was arrested after being surrounded by police. During the trial, he confessed to all of his crimes. The police confirmed that he had killed at least 30 people. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Pedro to 126 years in prison and sent him to Carandiru prison, which was considered the most terrifying prison in Brazil at that time. Carandiru prison began operations in 1956, initially designed to hold 3,000 inmates. However, due to the rising crime rate, by 1973, the actual number of prisoners had reached 8,000. The overcrowding situation was evident. In addition to the cramped conditions, the prison faced food shortages, poor sanitation, rampant disease, and frequent riots. It could be said that this prison resembled a hell on earth that at the age of 19. Pedro was deemed unlikely to survive long in prison by prosecutors. They believed he might fall victim to a violent inmate. However, they were taken aback when, on the way to prison, Pedro killed a fellow passenger who was a sexual offender. Inside the prison, Pedro faced bullying from some inmates, but he quickly adapted to life behind bars. Pedro crafted a small knife from an aluminum food container and kept it with him at all times. To maintain his fighting spirit, he exercised regularly every day. Soon after, 5 inmates attempted to eliminate Pedro, but thanks to his agility, he single-handedly fought off the 5, killing 3 and injuring the other 2. This confrontation made the other inmates wary of Pedro. As time passed, Pedro had spent a year in prison. An incident outside filled him with rage. His mother had been brutally murdered with 21 stab wounds, and the perpetrator was none other than his abusive father. The prison allowed Pedro to attend his mother's funeral. Upon seeing her body, he silently vowed to seek revenge. Pedro did not act immediately. Instead, he maintained a calm demeanor, patiently waiting for the right moment. Eventually, he got the perfect opportunity when his father was arrested and placed in the same prison as him. Pedro pretended to be injured to be taken to the medical room, where he then used his homemade knife to subdue a guard and seize his firearm. He approached his father's prison cell. Seeing the murderous look in Pedro's eyes, the father seemed to sense his fate. Pedro deliberately chose to stab his father 22 times with a knife instead of using a gun, which was one more than the 21 stabs his mother had endured. He cruelly ripped out his father's heart, bit into it, and then threw it on the ground. This brutal act further cemented Pedro's notorious reputation in prison. In the following years, he continued his killing spree, committing dozens more murders. Some victims had not provoked him at all. They simply fell out of favor with Pedro. For instance, one inmate was killed just for snoring too loudly. Another was murdered for witnessing Pedro being intimate with another inmate. Most of those Pedro killed were attempting to retaliate against him, but ended up being countered by his aggression. On one occasion, a drug gang gathered 20 men to confront Pedro. However, Pedro and one of his accomplices managed to break through their ranks and kill many of them. In fact, Pedro even turned the tables and killed 5 of them, despite sustaining serious injuries himself. Realizing they could not confront Pedro directly, some prisoners plotted to assassinate him, but Pedro remained very alert. From the moment he entered the prison, he understood that he was a target for revenge from many people, so he always took precautions. As a result, he survived 7 assassination attempts. Most of the assailants met their end at his hands. This pressure to survive fueled Pedro's increasing desire to escape from this hellish existence. He planned 8 escape attempts, all of which ultimately failed. After a series of violent acts and unsuccessful escape attempts, Pedro was placed in an extremely dangerous section of the prison and kept in solitary confinement to prevent him from committing further crimes. During his time in isolation, Pedro had no opportunity to continue his criminal activities, but due to his previous serial killings, he remained in the media spotlight. In prison interviews, Pedro openly declared that he had killed over 100 people without any remorse. He simply stated that he was a murderer and always would be. However, he consistently emphasized that he only targeted bad individuals, such as drug traffickers, and never harmed children, women, or good fathers. Because most of Pedro's victims were criminals, many Brazilians believed he was cleansing society, embodying justice, and considered him a folk hero. On January 24, 2007, Pedro was released after serving a 34-year sentence. After his release, he moved to Forza, a coastal city in eastern Brazil. During this period, Pedro lived relatively quietly, working as a security guard on a farm, but soon after, he was arrested again in 2011 for illegal possession of firearms along with previous charges such as unlawful detention and participating in riots. This time, Pedro received an 8-year prison sentence in 2018. Due to good behavior, Pedro was released from prison a year early. At the age of 64, he once again experienced freedom and breathed in the fresh air outside. However, Pedro vowed never to return to prison and completely changed his previous lifestyle. He began actively participating in media interviews and podcasts to share his criminal story. This led to Pedro's tale spreading throughout Brazil and around the world, turning him into an internet phenomenon known as the South American Punisher. During interviews, Pedro consistently stated that he had no regrets about killing over 100 people. He claimed that he felt no remorse because all his targets were thieves, drug dealers, and members of gangs. He insisted that he had never harmed any innocent individuals. Nevertheless, in his later years, Pedro gradually started to reflect on his past. He mentioned that while he did not regret taking lives, he regretted choosing a life of crime. Pedro converted to Christianity and prayed daily, asking God for forgiveness for his sins. He also covered up the tattoo, "I kill for fun," on his left arm with other tattoos. Additionally, he created a YouTube account to share his past story, encouraging others to lead virtuous lives and steer clear of crime. Beyond crimes like drug trafficking and theft, Pedro expressed concern about behaviors such as vandalism, skateboarding on sidewalks, disrespecting the elderly, lying to parents about whereabouts, and more. Although these actions are not classified as crimes, they still pose significant risks. Pedro hopes that young people will not fall into these vices. He does not want to be labeled as a serial killer or the Punisher, but simply wishes to be seen as an ordinary person. When asked about his future plans, Pedro expressed his desire to live a peaceful life on a small farm, quietly spending the rest of his days there. However, reality did not align with his wishes. As a controversial figure, it was unlikely that he could achieve the tranquility he longed for. Wherever he went, Pedro was recognized by others. More importantly, some individuals wished for him not to continue living. At 10 a.m. on March 0, 2023, at the age of 69, Pedro visited Midas Crew in the southeast region of Sao Paulo to see his sister and intended to stay for a while. Suddenly, a black car sped towards him. Two masked men jumped out and shot directly at Pedro. Ultimately, he was hit by 6 bullets, but for a criminal like him, that seemed insufficient. They also stabbed him fatally in the neck with a knife. News of Pedro's death spread quickly. His close friend and psychologist, I.S., wept bitterly. Pedro was my best friend. He protected me. Upon learning of his murder, the pain she felt was greater than losing anyone else. Local residents also expressed their sorrow over Pedro's death, stating that he had repented after being released from prison, prayed daily, and had completely changed. Furthermore, Pedro actively fought against local drug gangs and made significant contributions to the community. Due to the perpetrator wearing a mask, the police were unable to gather many clues, and the case remained stagnant for an extended period. Some people believe that the police intentionally overlooked investigating the motive behind the crime, as well as the vehicle left at the scene by the assailant. They could have potentially uncovered evidence. However, given the controversial nature of Pedro, the police were reluctant to disregard this case. In a subsequent investigation, the police announced that it was highly likely the case was linked to the PCC organization. This is Brazil's largest gang, established in 1993 at Carandiru prison, stemming from the dissatisfaction of 8 inmates regarding their living conditions. The organization was created to protect prisoners from bullying and to advocate for better conditions for them. The Kira massacre further fueled the growth of this organization. Over time, the PCC evolved into an extremely powerful criminal enterprise. Its headquarters are located in Sao Paulo, with illegal activities primarily involving drug trafficking, smuggling, kidnapping, armed robbery, and more. The influence of the PCC has spread from the prison system throughout the country and even abroad. Today, the PCC stands as the largest drug trafficking gang in Latin America. Pedro had previously killed several members of the PCC. After his release from prison, he continued to inflict significant damage on the drug trade in Sao Paulo. Therefore, considering the motive, the PCC was indeed the primary suspect. In August 2024, after 17 months of investigation, the Sao Paulo police revealed the identities of 3 suspects, Junio Silva and Rafael. Junio is a senior member of the PCC, having committed numerous crimes and always remaining in hiding. He was only arrested 2 months ago. The second suspect, Shva, is not a gang member, but rather a public figure and blogger. Pedro had previously collaborated with him on a podcast, but they later had a falling out, allegedly over financial issues. As a result, the police suspect that Shva may have a motive for the crime. The third suspect, Rafael, is an ordinary shop owner who does not know Pedro, but became implicated because the vehicle used by the perpetrator belonged to him. Although the case has not reached a final conclusion, it is evident that the motives of the 2 subsequent suspects are unclear, and it remains uncertain whether the actual perpetrator is among them. We can only hope for the Brazilian police's efforts. Reflecting on Pedro's tumultuous life, while many in Brazil praise him and label him as a folk hero, Pedro himself has repeatedly emphasized that he only kills those he deems evil, such as thieves and drug dealers, and has never harmed an innocent person. However, is that the truth? Among the more than 100 individuals Pedro claims to have killed, there are certainly many who did not deserve to die, including petty thieves and other minor offenders. There may even be completely innocent people, like the deputy mayor who dismissed Pedro's father and the security guard. Ultimately, no one knows for sure if Pedro's father actually stole anything. Pedro's justification for his killings often stems from his belief that the other party deserved to die, but that is merely his personal judgment. Even if the individual committed a crime, they should face legal consequences rather than being executed by Pedro on his own accord. Brazilian police have confirmed that Pedro is responsible for at least 71 murders. Due to the inability to trace many cases, the figure he claims of over 100 victims may indeed be accurate. Pedro's story has since been adapted into numerous novels and films, with the most famous television series being which is based on his true story. Finally, let's delve deeper into Pedro's psyche. What led him to become a serial killer? In various interviews, he has expressed his uncontrollable urge to kill. During an interview with journalist Marcelo from a Brazilian television station, Pedro stated that killing felt like shedding a burden, providing him with relief. He mentioned that without committing murder, he would struggle to sleep. In the book Serial Killer Made in Brazil by author Kim, criminologist Inanna Coy notes that Pedro indicated he would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who violated his rules, and his method of doing so was through murder. These statements reveal Pedro's blind belief in killing, as he never considered the existence of law or the state. Many mental health experts have analyzed Pedro and concluded that he exhibits signs of a mental disorder, specifically typical antisocial personality disorder. This could be attributed to genetic factors, but it may also stem from trauma experienced in utero when his father physically abused his mother, leading to abnormal brain development. Of course, in addition to inherent causes, his later living environment cannot be overlooked. Pedro did not receive a proper education and frequently witnessed his father's violence, preventing him from developing basic moral concepts and a sense of legal awareness. Furthermore, from a young age, his grandfather taught him how to shoot and slaughter livestock, which made him accustomed to bloody scenes. As a result, he developed a habit of using violence to solve problems. Perhaps in his eyes, killing a person and butchering an animal were not very different. At the age of 13, Pedro committed murder against his cousin over a trivial matter. This incident should have served as a warning sign, but his family showed no concern. His grandfather protected Pedro, allowing him to escape almost any punishment. No one guided or prevented Pedro's criminal behavior, causing him to grow up wild and become a murderer. Pedro's tragedy serves as a reminder of the harms of domestic violence, the lack of education, and the failure to correct wrongful behaviors in a timely manner. All these factors are like seeds quietly sprouting, ultimately resulting in bitter fruits that lead to crime. Finally, I would like to add some information about Brazilian law. Their maximum sentence of 30 years is too lenient, leading to rampant crime. The public is calling for stricter penalties. Ultimately, in 2019, Brazilian laws were amended to increase the maximum sentence to 40 years. This video concludes here. See you in the next one. Goodbye.